Welcome to the Superhumanize Podcast, where we explore the frontiers of human potential, consciousness, and creation. My guest today is someone whose life and work pulse with the resonance of a deep, sacred mission. Tom Cronin, keynote speaker, meditation teacher, author of The Portal, and a visionary committed to guiding humanity toward inner stillness as a path to global transformation. After a high-stakes career in finance led to a personal health crisis, Tom tuned inward and discovered something profound, that the silence within us is not empty, but alive, with intelligence, possibility, and healing. Today, he works with individuals, corporations, and communities across the globe to awaken what he calls the technology of stillness. His practice is rooted in Vedic meditation, a lineage of ancient wisdom that uses mantras to access deep inner states, echoing the oldest creation myths where frequency was the first architect of reality. We will speak today about the power of meditation, not just as a wellness tool, but as a gateway to personal sovereignty and planetary coherence. We will explore how frequencies, whether ancient mantras or modern neural rhythms, can shape our world from the inside out. This conversation is a portal. You are invited to enter.
Superhumanize. Accelerated evolution.
Tom, what a pleasure. Welcome to the Superhumanize Podcast.
It is great to be here. I'm looking forward to this conversation with you.
Me too. And from Santa Monica, Los Angeles, where I am, to Bondi Beach, Sydney. Yes, I love speaking across oceans and time zones. And what I'd like to begin with, Tom, is the role of stillness, and not as escape, but as a form of inner architecture, something that helps us meet with the noise of modern life as I'm sitting here outside of Montana Avenue with traffic and people rushing by, and how stillness can help us deepen presence. I actually spent part of my early childhood in India, so this idea of stillness as a kind of a superpower was seeded into me quite early on. And I sense in your work a similar pulse, that stillness is not passive, but that it's potent, kind of a quiet engine, if you so will. And you describe Vedic meditation not just as a tool for wellness, but it comes across as a form of inner technology. Could you share what distinguishes Vedic meditation from other forms of meditation, and especially with regard to the mechanisms of the impact on the nervous system, emotional regulation, and also consciousness?
Well, there's a lot in that. I might start with the beginning where you started with, which is stillness, and then we'll unpack the rest of what you were asking about there. Firstly, I think we need to just define what stillness is. A lot of people might think that they're sitting still while they're going through their TikTok. So stillness is the absence of motion, if we really think about it in that way, in a simple term. So the absence of motion, let's just look at it on a personal level. So stillness being the absence of physical motion. A lot of people say to me, oh, I meditate, I'm in stillness when I'm doing laps in the pool, or when I'm dancing, or when I'm bushwalking. But in actual fact, yes, there can be some sort of meditative component in the activity, but the essence is there's still an activity, there's still motion, there's still movement. What we're talking about here is absence of motion entirely. So that's where we've got physical stillness, we've got nervous system stillness, and we've got mental stillness. And that's the state that we can get into in what we call samadhi. Samadhi is, in Sanskrit terms, a deep meditative state. Sama is where we get the word same, and dhi means intellect. So this is where the intellect is the same. That means it's not moving, it's still. Now, when we have a still intellect that is awake and conscious, as opposed to a still intellect that's asleep, we have a really deep, phenomenal level of physiological rest as well. So now we have an aligned level of stillness happening in the mind and body. And then you talked about presence. So how does stillness relate to presence? Presence is born out of stillness. We arrive in presence, which is the state of just conscious awareness, where there's no neurological activities, there's no nervous system activities, there's no physiological activity, and now we're in a deep state of presence, which is born and arises out of the stillness that it's almost like stillness is the arena that presence arises from. And now the big question is, how do we get to stillness? And I found that Vedic meditation being a phenomenal tool, and probably in my mind, after doing all the research in the world around different methodologies to get to stillness, I found Vedic meditation, otherwise known also as transcendental meditation, as a mechanism or methodology that will lure the mind deeper and deeper into the realm beyond thinking, into conscious awareness, or we call it pure consciousness. And the way it works so quickly and effortlessly is that we have these mantras, and the mantra just really does all the work for us, where it leads the mind into that magical realm. I was even teaching some people yesterday, and they'd all done other forms of meditation. And it was their first time that they'd meditated using the mantras and using Vedic meditation. And it was quite fascinating how nearly all of them came out of their meditation went, wow, I went so deep so quickly. And again, that's just the use of the mantra makes it so much easier.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for illuminating this, Tom. And when you speak of the mantra, do you also speak of the mantra in combination or as a kind of primordial sound? Or is it a sentence that you repeat quietly in the stillness of your mind?
Yeah, it's a great question. The mantras that we use and there's thousands of different mantras. I am amazing, I am awesome, or it could be Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. We use particular what are called Bij mantras, and these are specifically cognized as primordial vibrations or resonances that have this incredible influence and effect on the mind to move the mind from the beta brainwave active state down into those deeper meditative states of delta brainwave frequency through this natural synchronization or entrainment, I call it, where the resonance and repetition of the resonance of that mantra in the brain has this incredible aligning effect of moving the brain from beta brainwave down into delta. So by default, the brain moves into that deeper meditative state through the influence of the mantra.
Mm-hmm. And what I find fascinating when we talk about resonance, we also talk about sound. Sound is a frequency, has a resonance as well. In so many ancient cosmologies, it was not light that came first, but sound, frequency. I think also the Vedas proclaim the world is sound. And even though in the Bible, the world begins with, let there be light, it is spoken. So in other words, vibration was the first sculptor, so to speak. And we also get that reflected back in quantum physics. Vibration and frequency are now understood as primary, not secondary forces that shape matter. And not as a metaphor, but as the skeleton key of all becoming. And when we speak of frequency in meditation, we are actually entering architecture. And how does the use of frequency meditation differ from other forms of mantra or repetition practices that we find in the West?
Gosh, you have such great questions. Now, I'm not an astrophysicist, and I'll share the depth of what I know. But certainly when it comes to sound, like you're talking about vibration, I believe from what I've gathered in information so far is that you're correct, that it starts with sound first. And there's an Australian film called The Dish, which is all about, fictional film about these sort of scientists that discovered this resonance that was humming through the universe. They had this big satellite dish and they kept picking up this vibration, which in spiritual communities, a lot of people might get the tattoo of the Om sign on their shoulder. And the Om is that resonance. It's that frequency where there's formlessness, which is the initial starting point of the universe, which is the universe is just formlessness, it's divinity or God, as some might call it. But then the explosion and the resonance of that into and its starting frequency point. So it's where the formlessness becomes form through the initial starting point being a resonance or frequency, which some have recognized as oh. And that's the starting point of manifestation, as you say. But when it comes to your question about the resonance of mantras, everything is some form of resonance and influence. If you go to a rock concert with Metallica You walk into that auditorium, there's a frequency, there's a resonance, the music, the crowd, and that's going to influence and entrain you to synchronize into that arena. If you go to a fun park and get on a scary roller coaster ride, things are happening, music we listen to, movies that we watch, there's influences of resonance happening throughout our lives all the time. And what we want to use with the mantras is these particular bij mantras to use the resonance of that particular mantra to synchronize our frequency state into that deep meditative delta brainwave frequency. When it comes to other mantras, there's probably, depending on what the mantra is, more emphasis on this saying of what the words are, the meaning of the words. If you're saying words like I am beautiful or I'm abundant, then you're less going to be influenced by the resonance of those words, more by the meaning of those words. And then the meaning of those words is going to play a role in influencing your vibrational state. But look, there's so many different mantras to speak on that they're all going to have different meanings and different resonances. But certainly with the Vedic mantras, we're using them purely for the purpose of de-exciting the mind, which then leads to de-exciting the nervous system. And that leads to eventually and ultimately de-exciting the physical body. And then all three of those go into deep stillness. So there's specific bij mantras, only about 20, 30 of them that we use for this practice.
And this is really fascinating to me, Tom. So what you have just shared, it basically means that via these Vedic mantras, we have the ability to restructure not only the mind, but also the body, the nervous system, and the more subtle energy systems. Can you share with us some of the changes, some of the transformations you have witnessed, so our audience can get more of an idea of how powerful these mantras can be?
If you think about there's measurable frequencies that humans can be in at any given time during the day, and these are what's called hertz, Hertz, and these are measurable vibration and states that we're in. So you've got shame, guilt, anger, fear, which are very low resonances, very low frequencies or low hertz. Shame and guilt around 20 or 30 hertz. We've got anger, I think, is around 40 or 50. Fear is around 60. But if we want to be in love, we need to be that's a 528 hertz. So it's a much higher frequency than those low frequencies of anger, shame, guilt, and sadness and fear. And then we've got peace at 600, and then we've got enlightenment at 700. So enlightenment is the pinnacle of the human experience when it comes to the resonance or measurable vibrational state of the human when they're in that state of enlightenment, of light. So it's a very high frequency state. And so what we tend to find happen with a lot of humans when they're meditating is by default, as a result of the meditation, they start experiencing more peace. Now remember, peace is 600 hertz. It's above love. It's a very high frequency. Now, there's not a lot of our world that we can actually achieve peace through the activities of the world. So I can't get to peace by playing Fortnite. I can't get to peace by shopping in Walmart. I can't get to peace by shopping on Amazon. I can't get to peace by swiping left to right on Tinder. Can't get to peace by watching Netflix. Everything in our world is actually moving us away from peace because it's moving us into activity and stimulation. A cup of coffee, a line of Coke, a glass of red wine, all these things are about stimulation, which is the distancing of us from peace. And if you look at the world, we'll see that there's very little peace in the world. And yet it's one of the pinnacle human experiences, and very few people are subscribing to it. And we only have to look at cultures or traditions that have the subscribing to peace as the core of their foundation. So monasteries and ashrams, we wouldn't say that they're perfect realms, but we certainly find that people become a lot more fulfilled, a lot more loving, a lot happier. And so what we want to do is we want to integrate peace into our daily lives. And how do we do that? We want to still the mind and still the body. And that's where stillness comes back in. So stillness leads us to peace, which is one of the pinnacle human experiences that we could get.
Yes, absolutely, Tom. And I think all the examples you mentioned before, playing Fortnite or Netflix or going to Walmart and purchasing or Amazon, all that, these are all things, or scrolling on social media, we get dopamine hits, right? And that is a spiral in itself. So to be able to break out of that and find a way to anchor in peace, that's a phenomenal thing. And I'm curious, In your view, Tom, can this frequency of peace scale? Meaning, do the inner shifts of someone who meditates, who can connect with peace, can that ripple out into the relational collective or even planetary coherence?
Well, I love that you've got a planet behind you. One thing we know as a scientific phenomenon is this concept called event horizon, which in some terms means the influence, the sphere of influence. So everything has a sphere of influence. So the Earth has a sphere of influence beyond its physical mass that influences the moon in its gravitational orbit. So you've got a physical mass here, Earth, physical mass here, moon, but the distance between the two is millions of miles. And yet the resonance of the Earth is influencing the moon. You take the moon, which is just a little ball of dust that floats around the Earth. Now, beyond its physical mass, it is vibrationally influencing billions of tons of water in our oceans every single day. You take the sun, which is a sphere of fire, and it's millions and millions of miles away, and yet it has the ability through its vibrational frequency to actually burn your skin after about an hour of sitting on the beach without sun cream. And so we know that everything has this sphere of influence, this ability to influence the environment around it. And this is something that whether you're an angry, frustrated, or anxious person, or you're a full of peace and love person, both of those have an event horizon, a sphere of influence that emanates outward beyond your physical mass. And this is something that we find with peace, is that it's a very powerful and potent, as is love, as is enlightenment, influencer to influence fields of people around it. Even you and I right now, you're in Santa Monica, I'm in Bondi. We're having a conversation. Our words and the vibration that's being infused into the words will be having an influence on people in future times when they're listening to this podcast. And even just the content of the discussion that we're having will be having a vibrational uplift in that person. If they're in a lower frequency, it has the potential to elevate them into a higher frequency. And this is a lot of what we do in our retreats, is put them into an incubator over an extended period of time, over multiple days, where everything is crafted and designed to purely elevate their frequency. And what we see is low frequency purging happening from their body as sadness and guilt and shame and fear start just diffusing out of their body. It's quite remarkable to watch as they get into lighter and lighter states and higher frequencies.
Tell us a little bit more about your retreats. I know you have retreats in also incredibly beautiful locations, which certainly helps, but what may someone expect? Of course, it will be different from individual to individual, but what are some of the things, you already shared a few of them, that you witness by creating this safe container and sharing what you learned and your teachings to people who are open to this, Tom?
Yeah, and we specifically choose those beautiful locations because we do a lot of research on the vibrational vortex of that location. So if we were to run a retreat in, say, New York or Baghdad, not necessarily choosing Baghdad to criticize a place where there's maybe conflict or a lot of stress, then you might say Gaza at the moment is something present. It would be very hard to get into those deeper states of meditation, but also those higher vibrations of peace, because there might be a lot of resonance or vibration in those locations that is very low frequency. Anger, fear. If you've got a lot of anger and fear in a town or a city, then that's going to have an influencing effect on your retreat experience. So we go to places that are very peaceful, very beautiful, very high vibration. So certain places in Bali, north of Ubud, there's a place here in Australia called Byron Bay, has a very high frequency. I know, for instance, Sedona seems to have a high frequency. Pai in Hawaii has a high frequency. So there are certain locations around the world. We had one in Greece, which was a very high frequency, that have really beautiful energies within that environment that helps influence our retreat experience. But the program, we use breath work, we use some yoga, we use a lot of meditation, workshops and talks, food. Everything is crafted to bring people into this higher vortex and higher frequency. And what we see as a result of that is, firstly, they get extremely elevated by the end of the retreat, extremely blissful, feeling lots of love, lots of connection, lots of trust and peace in the world and in the process of life. But during the process, it can get a bit messy because we're purging some of the lower frequencies. So we're seeing people having some emotional releases around sadness that might be stored in the body, anger releases that might be stored in the body. So we see some purging happening, which is really beautiful, and they're held really safely and supported through those processes. And again, we emphasize at the start of the retreat that, look, this is just energy that needs to clear out and expend itself, that's been sitting dormantly in your body from some previous experience in your lifetime.
Yes, and this is truly a sacred work that you're doing. And I also think everybody who engages in meditation, everybody who sits in intentional stillness, it's a kind of activism, not the type of activism that necessarily takes to the streets, but it is an activism that transmits a frequency that is, in my opinion, capable of reorganizing the collective field. And in this frame, meditation is not a retreat. It's actually participation in the architecture of possibility. And I know in your book, and it's not just a book, it's a movie as well, The Portal, and it's also sacred containers that are connected to that. You have collaborated with individuals like Daniel Schmachtenberger. He speaks of a civilizational phase shift, or Julia Mossbridge, who speaks of transcendent futures. They're all not just describing policy or technology, but an inner evolution that then flows into this foundational infrastructure of peace, which you just also explained is at the highest vibration. And what I really found deeply moving and what resonates with me profoundly with regard to your work, Tom, is that it seems your work is an invitation to recognize stillness not just as a healing modality, but as a global contribution. This is also what you describe in The Portal. It's a call, I remember, like a call to inner coherence, and that's not separate from planetary well-being, that it is planetary well-being expressed through our human soul, through the instrument of our body and mind.
Yeah, I had someone once criticize me for the indulgence of meditation and suggesting that it's a very selfish act. You're not really contributing to the planet because you're just isolating yourself in your own personal bliss. And it's very selfish and self-obsessed. And I can see and understand and empathize with that viewpoint because it looks that way on one dimension, which is just the physical act that this person only has their physical experience of them being isolated and separated and segregated. But that would imply that we're not connected at all in any way, shape, or form on vibrational levels or beyond the physical mass, which is actually not the case at all. And you only have to take one person that is in a particular state of consciousness, let's just call them Hitler, and then from that state of consciousness, they perform actions. And the actions are expressions of movement from a particular vibrational resonance that you're in. So if we were able to get every single person on the planet into a state of peace, and then from that state of peace, that vibrational resonance, they start speaking, acting, thinking, doing things, creating things, what we're going to find is a flow-on effect of people creating things from a state of peace. There's a beautiful Sanskrit phrase, Yogastha Kuru Kamani, which means established in being, which is peace or fulfillment or presence, then perform action. So for most people, they're going into action from a state of lack and low vibration and trying to extract something from and commoditize something from that action. I'm going into action to extract an experience of fulfillment. But from the Vedic worldview, we establish fulfillment first. Let's get people into a state of their true nature, which is they're part of a collective unified field of blissful lovingness. And then from there, go and start creating things, whether it's books or companies or businesses. And what you'll find is that the expression of someone from a state of peace and the manifestation of that is extremely different than someone in the state of anger, or someone in a state of greed, or someone in a state of fear. And world wars come from people in vibrational states of fear or anger. And we can see this happening in the world still today, where our leaders aren't in states of peace. And for me, I think the greatest contribution that we can bring to the world is our state of peace.
I agree wholeheartedly with you, Tom. And as you said, when individuals operate from fear, lack, grief, anger, the actions can only be extractive that come forth from that. And when we operate from peace, from abundance, what we do and what we also reverberate is fundamentally different. That's also why I've never had the pleasure and the privilege to be in her presence, but I've heard from friends some incredible stories, individuals like Amma, who travels the world giving hugs. I've heard from even some people who seemed very hardened and got drug along to the experience, and they received a hug and it was transformative for them. Talk about simply frequency affecting you in a way that is palpable. In your work, the portal, the project actually also highlights stories of transformation that ripple outward. Can you share with our audience a story that most deeply moved you, where someone's transformation really became a catalyst also for collective change?
Gosh, the first thing that comes to mind is my own personal story. I went from being a very narcissistic, hedonistic broker on a trading room floor, Wolf of Wall Street, making lots and lots of money, indulging in my own sensory pleasures with that money, drinking, drugs, partying, purely extracting and consuming pleasure from action, and very egocentric. This is the thing with these states, that it's very egocentric, where my fulfillment and my pleasures are the primary focus of all my actions. But when I went through my dark night, I went through a bit of a nervous breakdown and found meditation and started meditating. I certainly didn't become perfect, and I'm still on the journey to continue to refine and be better. But what I found was that my contribution to the world continues to multiply. The less I become Tom, and the more I realize that I'm part of actually not an individual egocentric identity, but really I'm the divine or God or source expressing itself through this vessel. This vessel is really an expression and a manifestation, a vibrational resonance of the divine. It's just the degree of which we've realized that as humans is the degree of which we have suffering. I think that the gap between bliss and suffering is the degree of which we realize our true nature. And they call it self-realization, which is to realize the true nature of the self. And so as I am in the process of becoming more realized in my true nature, which is that I'm actually not Tom, the personality. I'm a collective unified field of, some would say, the divine or source, expressing itself through multiple forms, which is trees, amoebas, humans, and solar systems. Then we tend to find that we become less self-identified and more, how do I make a better and bigger impact in the world as a person of influence that can alleviate and remove as much suffering as possible. And we see this time and time again with your Gandhis and your Mandelas and your Martin Luther Kings. There's people that feel this natural inclination to make a positive influence. And not that please just don't see that I'm putting myself in those categories at all. I'm just trying to just chip away and make a little bit of impact in my corner of the world. But I definitely see that I can see my own arc of that journey. And I see that time and time again with my students. I'm running this, just started this week, a teacher training program, teaching other teachers to become, or other people to become teachers of Vedic meditation. And these people started off with being in a stress state, anxious state. They decided to learn a technique of meditation that really changed their lives so much that they're like, wow, I want to start bringing this to other people's lives because it changed my life. And so now they're in teacher training, then they can start sharing what they've discovered. And we see this multiplying effect happening across the world, which is coming back to Daniel. I believe this multiplication on a rapid, massive scale of people waking up and then wanting to impact other people to wake up, and this exponential growth curve of conscious awakening to move us into that phase shift, which I believe is a really exciting proposition for the planet.
Yes, certainly. And your aim, Tom, is to inspire 1 billion people to meditate. And that's more than a goal. That really feels like a planetary transmission. And I'd like to know from you, in the most beautiful of all visions, how do you imagine the world might look like if this intention is fulfilled? What systems would dissolve? What new ones may emerge?
We've seen microcosms of this around the world, in whether it's And I say this to people that have been on a retreat. You've all come from different places around the world. You spend 6 days together meditating. And at the end of those retreats, we'll have 20, 30 people in such incredible cohesiveness and so much love for each other, where they're different religions, they're different races, they're different age groups, they're different social economic backgrounds, all have been transcended, and they start to find a unity through the resonance of love. Your love, I'm love. Wow, we've got something in common here. And those perceived differences where you're that religion and I'm this religion, or you're that country and I'm that country, and you're that race and I'm that race. We see all these transcendences of these seeming separations, and we see a great sense of harmony and compassion and kindness. And of course, like I said, we're not perfect. We still have our fallibilities and we still have constraints and limitations and conditions. But what I do see on the planet is I see business and politics and education and the medical system, the pharmaceutical system become so deeply compassionate and caring and prioritizing the uplift of humanity rather than what can I commoditize and extract out of this experience for my own personal gains? How do I get reelected again the next year? What do I have to do that? Or what business can I create that I can extract as much money out of the population as possible? What we tend to find in the microcosm that we're seeing of people in these states, which has the potential obviously to be a macrocosm when we get more and more people in those states, is that their businesses become more kind and compassionate and for the better of humanity. We probably won't have something like Coca-Cola being produced because it doesn't contribute in any positive way to humanity other than purely pleasure, which has a pain associated to it. So not to pick on one particular company, but what we will find hopefully in that enlightened planet when we get there, and I believe we will, that we will see greater harmony, we will see greater compassion, we will see a greater level of equality across the planet and acceptance. And there's just so many different areas that it can be improved on. It's just quite remarkable. Definitely less conflict, more negotiation, more discussion, better integration of humans with the planet rather than trying to commoditize and extract from the planet. We'll be repositioned back into our place, try and see how we live without bees or whales or fungi. It's going to work out too well for us. So we'll be a lot more intelligent on a wisdom level.
Yes, and wisdom. It's not only about knowledge, it's about wisdom as well. And speaking about knowledge, particularly with the evolution in technology that we're seeing happening so rapidly, in the portal, you do not position technology and stillness as opposites. And I'm curious, Tom, how do you see the role of sacred technology, whether it's, let's say, in film or neurofeedback or social platforms or AI, as part of humanity's evolutionary leap?
Yeah, we're a bit ahead of the game when we were talking about AI in the film, and that really challenged a lot of people. We talked about Sophia, who was an AI humanoid that was designed to only be unconditionally loving. And one of the premises in the film is that humans are conditioned and coded by their society and their surrounds, and their generations. Previously, that influences the way they think and act. And we are doing the same thing with AI. So our conditioning, our biases are embedded into those technologies. And what I feel is that technology becomes an expression, an extension of our state of consciousness, because it's our state of consciousness that's creating the technologies. So again, it comes back to the premise when I'm speaking on stages in large organizations and conferences, it's like, we can go out and try and make the world a better place, but we're going to be doing it from our state of consciousness. So if we're not upgrading our state of consciousness, what we're going to try and do to make the world a better place might not always end up in a good place because our state of consciousness is not at that level to be able to do that. And so I feel that the biggest shift that we need to make is our state of presence, our state of consciousness, because that will get, and all our biases and codes and constructs will get embedded into those technologies. So if we get more conscious, more loving, more compassionate, more peaceful, then ideally, hopefully, our technologies will be an extension and expression of that. I think we're at a conundrum now, as Daniel Schmachtenberger showed us in the film and talked about this in the film and the book, that unfortunately what's happening is our technology is advancing much more rapidly than our state of consciousness. And so now we have very advanced technologies being born out of states of consciousness that aren't highly wise and conscious. And that's where things can get really messy.
Yeah. And I think that's also where Daniel Schmachtenberger speaks of existential risk and civilizational coherence, and where it's basically about if you want to call the people who are developing all these technologies, if you want to also call them futurists. So the futurist who does not meditate may be able to predict timelines, but the one who does can shape them and can actually shape them so there's a coherence and so that it comes from peace. And I'm curious, this may be too personal of a question. It's totally okay to not answer it, but I'm curious, Tom, do you use AI on a regular basis? And if so, what is your personal, how do you say, maybe baseline, or how do you approach communing, exchanging with artificial intelligence?
It's a really good question. I'm happy to answer it. You've got to think about what these technologies or devices are. They're basically vehicles. A mantra is a technology that has been utilized to change a shape, change a state, to change something. Otherwise, why would we use the mantra? Why would I sit and close my eyes and repeat this resonance? And so there's a structure or form that was cognized that I can use that's going to change my state. Now, I have a remote control here, which is a remote for my air conditioning and heating system over on the wall. Now, before we had the capacity for this gadget to influence that device through the ether, I had to physically, manually go over there and press a button. But now we've got these things that make life easier. So AI is really just an extension of that, another methodology to make our life better and simpler. And for me, AI is just a more advanced version at this stage of Google. Before in the past would say, can you please help me find something that I can't find? It's somewhere out there in this field, but maybe you can help me find it. And so you type into Google, I need a mechanic in Bondi Junction. And Google will go, here's a couple of mechanics in Bondi Junction. Wow, that's incredible. It managed to provide me with a piece of information that I wasn't able to access myself, or it would take a lot of time and effort for me to find that information. And this has simplified it. So at this point in time where AI is at, is that it's simplifying our lives. It's making it a lot easier to do things. That's the nature of all species, is to move towards greater ease and less energy expenditure. But what's the price that we're paying for it? I'm not sure. I'm not an AI expert. I think obviously energy-wise, it's consuming a lot of energy. I think at this stage, while AI is not yet conscious, it's still just a great, very efficient form of helping me refine an email that I need to write for a proposal, or come up with a really good outline for a keynote presentation that I've got in mind. And I think its ability to succinct and summarize and refine and improve some of the things that we as humans, which we're evolving, AI is evolving. It's just that probably AI will evolve a little bit faster than us because we're very slow to evolve, but we're faster than a cockroach to evolve. So this rate of evolution is something that's been happening at different speeds across all different species. We've been evolving much faster than many other species, even the Homo species. The sapien evolved much faster than the other four Homo species. So that's why we superseded and outdid the other Homo species. And no one seemed to have a problem about that. So I can see that AI most likely, with its capacity to learn so quickly, most likely will supersede the human species at some point.
Yes, I'm actually excited for the possibilities and having my eyes peeled on that, my fingers on the pulse of that. Thank you for sharing your perspective on this, Tom. And something else I'd like to learn a little more about is, because we've mentioned them a few times here, you're collaborating with thinkers like Daniel Schmachtenberger or Julia Mossridge. How have insights from their work potentially shifted your understanding of meditation's role in shaping humanity's and also the planetary future?
They're very supportive of what I initially always had intended, which was that I could see how much meditation changed my life. And as my life started to change, the ripple effect of my life affecting other people's lives, thousands of people's lives are better because of the work that I've done, which was the work that I've done to change my inner state, then resulted in lots of other people being able to change their inner state. And so when I came across the brilliant minds of Daniel and Julia Mossridge, who was some of the great minds on the planet, Mikey Siegel, I really feel a deep sense of love and gratitude for their contribution to this collective conversation that's building. And even you and I having this conversation is, again, another layer of this collective conversation. So the more we talk about these types of things, the less we talk about what toothpaste the Kardashians are using, the more we're going to see a phenomenal shift on the planet as we get and invite more and more people into these collective conversations, which is really exciting. And so Daniel and Julia, for me, it illuminated and gave solid support to what I'd already been contemplating and in cognizing, and which was the intention ultimately behind the film, to bring that knowledge to a mainstream discussion.
And Tom, many futurists warn off collapse. They paint horror scenarios. You seem to carry a very steady flame of hope. And I would like to know, how do you personally carry the stark reality of planetary crisis we are dealing with on so many levels, and the spiritual invitation to move towards coherence and beauty and the best of all possible worlds?
Yeah, I know there's a lot of people. I had someone say to me the other day, they didn't want to give birth to a child. They didn't want to have a child because they didn't want to bring their child into this world. I'm like, wow, you're seeing a very different world to the one I'm seeing. Crisis has always been a evolutionary methodology. It's a process that is a requirement at times to dislodge a stuckness that is holding up the process of evolution. So if the dinosaurs are blocking the arrival of humans, then it may just be that dinosaurs need to be eliminated so that a more evolved species that hopefully is going to bring greater consciousness and awareness to the planet, then maybe that might need to happen. The Homo species, we had 4 of them get eliminated. We don't have Neanderthals on the planet anymore. Is anyone curled up in a ball crying because of the loss of the Neanderthal? Or are they celebrating that we now have the Homo sapien, which is quite phenomenal? And so if the Homo sapien seems to be a block in the process of evolution, then if that is something that needs to be cleared, then I'm not suggesting this is what we want to see happen, because what we want to do is we want to evolve to the point where we're not blocking the process, so we continue on our relevance. Because the thing is, the more relevant we are, the more conscious we are, the more evolution is being supported and expressed through us. We are the vehicles of evolution. So we can be the vehicle of evolution, or we can be the block for evolution. And so really this is one or the other. Are you the block to evolution, which is what we tend to do in our stuckness and our rigidity and our resistance? Or are we supporting evolution through our continuous adaptive capacity to evolve and grow? Because evolution insists we must evolve. It insists we must grow. And so if we get rigid and stuck and calcified in our state of being, I'm not going to change, I'm just going to keep doing the same thing, which is what I did for 10 years. And then a cataclysmic event came along into my life. Now, in the middle of that cataclysmic event, which is a deep, dark night of the soul or a nervous breakdown, where I was having suicidal ideation, one might say, this is a crisis. This is terrible. This is horrible. This is the worst thing that could be happening. But if we were to see the full arc of that trajectory and see the transformation that I went through as a result of that crisis, and crisis being a catalyst for that huge transformation, then one would say, this is amazing what's happening. Wow, this is so awesome what you're going through. It's playing such an integral role in the next phase of your life, because I can future forecast the next stage of what happens beyond this. I see crisis as, if it's needed, then it's needed. If it's not needed, then it's not needed. And ultimately, we want to be in a state where we reduce and eliminate the need for crisis, because we're constantly adapting, evolving without the need for the crisis.
Yes, Tom. And before we close, I'd like to briefly return to the idea of sound and stillness, not just as healing modalities, but actually as doorways to remembering who we truly are. And in your work, I feel a call to return both to ancient knowing and to a more coherent future as well. And for those listening today, perhaps feeling overwhelmed or anxious or uncertain, just carrying a lot, what simple practice or reminder would you offer them as a first step into the portal of their own transformation?
I think one thing we really need on a daily basis, it's particularly now more than ever, because there's so much noise and so much distraction and so much stimulation and so much information, that we really need to compartmentalize windows every single day of a form of meditation. For me, I found Vedic meditation or transcendental meditation. And if you haven't learned that, then go and find a teacher in your community or go to my website, tomcronin.com. I can lead you to some teachers or you can learn with me. And having some structured meditation method on a daily basis, we see a really clear distinction between those people that integrate daily meditation practices, particularly tribes of or groups of people, and those that have just constant noise and stimulation. The disparity between their levels of fulfillment and happiness and inner peace is quite stark and remarkable. So I would highly recommend learning some meditation somewhere and really blocking out time each day, even though the dopamine is much more compelling to be scrolling through TikTok or getting through some emails or watching a Netflix or eating some ice cream. But I would really start to get very discriminatory about, are you craving dopamine because you're coming from lack? Or are you in the interest of cultivating a deep, long-lasting peace that is not as extreme as the dopamine, but is certainly much more potent and everlasting than the dopamine?
Yes, absolutely, Tom. And we've talked about your retreats. We've talked about your book and movie. Are there any other offerings currently that you're very excited about and you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, a big part of what I do these days, which I'm really excited about, is supporting other conscious leaders. We've got a lot of breath workers, yoga teachers, meditation teachers, healers, coaches that are wanting to impact more people around the world. They've found that that tool has made a difference in their life and they want to share it. I coach people on a weekly basis in a group container called the Zen Academy. And why it's called Zen Academy is because it's an academy where you learn. And the emphasis of what we bring to the world is our Zen, our energy. And it's the state that we want to create for the foundation of our business. So it's a beautiful container to help conscious leaders build their businesses and get their impact out into the world. Everything from how to get keynote presentations and speak on stages, to running full retreats, to having online programs, to creating coaching programs, to getting a book written and published. So everything that needs to be done to help you grow your business is a container that I like to support those people in on a weekly basis.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tom. We'll make sure to mention all of that and put the links in the show notes. I'm so happy we got the opportunity to connect and spend some time in each other's presence and also to learn from you. Much gratitude to you.
Gratitude to you for creating this space, this container, and for elevating a conversation that is rarely had in our world today and inspiring me to be able to respond to your questions and conversations. So thanks for that. And thanks for listening in, everyone. It's great to have you sharing space with me here today.
Superhumanize. Accelerated evolution.